Sure. Can I ask you a quick question really quickly?
Sure.
Can I ask you a question? Any extra details? Because we did just get the independent autopsy results today. Anything?
A reporter approached Sheriff John Ledbetter on Wednesday with a direct question just hours after the independent autopsy findings became public. His response was only one word. That brief exchange reflected the current state of the investigation. Over the past 2.5 weeks, the case has shifted from confident public statements to increasing silence as new forensic evidence complicated the picture. Wednesday became the moment those two realities collided. Before examining the independent autopsy findings, it's important to understand how that encounter unfolded. If you're following this case, subscribe and turn on notifications. This update centers on two key developments: Sheriff Ledbetter's response after the new forensic report, and the conclusions reached by two independent board-certified forensic pathologists who reviewed the evidence separately. While the sheriff said very little, the report sparked widespread discussion among medical experts and legal observers online. To understand why the exchange mattered, it's necessary to revisit the early days of the investigation. Before any autopsy had been completed, or an official cause of death determined, Sheriff Ledbetter publicly stated he did not believe foul play was involved. That early conclusion has remained one of the investigation's biggest points of criticism. Nolan Wells' family says those remarks damaged their confidence in the investigation and ultimately led them to commission an independent autopsy. Because of that history, every word, or lack of words, from Ledbetter carried added significance when a WDSU reporter approached him after the independent findings became public. Many expected answers about the new forensic evidence that had shifted the public conversation. Nolan Wells' death was initially described by authorities as an apparent accidental drowning. However, as the investigation continues, questions remain, and public criticism has continued to grow. Earlier that day, attorney Benjamin Crump joined Nolan's family to present preliminary findings from an independent autopsy performed on July 10th. According to the report, both the cause and manner of death remain undetermined. The forensic experts explained they could not reach a final conclusion because certain throat structures were reportedly unavailable for examination, having remained with the Mississippi State Medical Examiner after the original autopsy. The independent examination also noted a reddish discoloration on the back of Nolan's head. While the report drew no final conclusions from that observation, it quickly became another major point of public discussion. Nolan's family has repeatedly expressed frustration with both the investigation and the communication they received from local authorities. Those concerns ultimately led them to retain attorney Benjamin Crump in an effort to bring greater transparency to the case. Following the release of the independent findings, Sheriff Ledbetter's earlier statement that foul play was not suspected once again became the focus of public attention. A WDSU reporter approached him seeking answers about the new report and whether investigators had any updated information to share. The exchange unfolded slowly. The reporter reminded the sheriff that she had previously attempted to interview him nearly 2 weeks earlier, but had been told he was unavailable. What happened next quickly became another closely watched moment in a case where every public statement is being examined as closely as the evidence itself.
Sure. Can I ask you a quick question really quickly?
Sure.
Can I ask you a question? I'm Chantel with WDSU in New Orleans. I came up here 2 weeks ago to meet with you, but I think y'all were in and out of meetings about the Wells case, and then they told me eventually you just weren't able to come out. So that was like July.
The reporter also pointed out that the Jackson County Sheriff's Office had not shared a public update on its official social media since July 8th, leaving nearly 2 weeks without meaningful communication. During that time, the biggest development came not from law enforcement but from the independent autopsy released earlier that day. She then asked whether the sheriff's office would provide any new information or update the public now that the family's findings had been made public. When no clear answer came, she followed up. Was the sheriff's office no longer commenting on the case? Had investigators decided to stop responding to questions from the media and the public? The unanswered questions lingered, making the silence itself a major part of the story, and leaving yet another important question without a clear answer.
I'm wondering if you guys will be releasing any more details concerning the case. The last thing I saw on your social media was on July 8th, the same day. So any extra details, because we did just get the independent autopsy results today. Anything that you would give us?
None at this time.
Okay, so y'all are no longer answering questions about the case?
Yeah. I know you're trying to get some edited footage, but
no, I'm just asking. I'm just confirming.
That's all we're saying. We're actively investigating.
Thank you. My name is Chantel. We're from New Orleans, WDSU News.
Hey, I'm Doug. Doug. Nice to meet y'all.
Okay. Yeah.
It's still actively being investigated.
Again, this was from the press conference this morning. When mom said that y'all were saying there was no foul play in the beginning, but now this, has anything changed since then at all, or?
Like I said, we're actively investigating the case. That's still active, ongoing.
The state medical examiner did not release their report right at this time.
If I were you, I'd check with the district attorney's office too. As far as I know, you don't have to publish that. That's going through the district attorney's office. That's not, we don't do that. It's state medical.
His answer was simple: no. That one-word reply became the turning point of the exchange. The reporter reminded Sheriff Ledbetter that Nolan Wells' mother had criticized his early statement that investigators did not suspect foul play. She asked whether the independent autopsy had caused him to reconsider that position. He never answered directly. Instead, he repeated that the investigation remained active. When asked about the state's autopsy, he said it had not yet been released and referred further questions to the district attorney's office, explaining the matter was now under their authority. Throughout the exchange, one pattern stood out. Early in the investigation, before any autopsy had been completed, the sheriff confidently stated foul play was not suspected. Weeks later, after new forensic findings emerged, he declined to discuss the evidence in detail. That shift has become one of the main reasons public scrutiny continues to grow. That does not necessarily suggest wrongdoing. Law enforcement often limits public comments during active investigations to protect the integrity of the case. Still, many observers have questioned the sequence of events. Strong conclusions first, cautious silence after new evidence raised additional questions. The encounter also suggested the sheriff was unprepared for detailed questions immediately following the independent autopsy. While he repeatedly emphasized the investigation was ongoing, Nolan Wells' family has continued calling for greater transparency and clearer communication from local authorities. To the sheriff's credit, he correctly noted that the state's official autopsy had not yet been released and that certain legal matters fall under the district attorney's office. Referring questions there is not, by itself, evidence of avoiding the issue. What made the exchange significant was the overall pattern. On a day when many expected detailed answers, the lead investigator offered little beyond confirming the case remained active. While Sheriff Ledbetter said very little, two independent forensic pathologists publicly shared their professional opinions after reviewing Dr. Roger Mitchell's preliminary autopsy report. Neither expert was connected to the investigation, Nolan Wells' family, or the state of Mississippi. Notably, they did not reach the same conclusion. Both reviewed the same report, but interpreted it differently, highlighting how experienced forensic specialists can examine identical evidence and arrive at different opinions. The first expert, who has performed hundreds of autopsies, immediately focused on one issue: the absence of certain neck structures during the second examination. He questioned why those tissues were unavailable, suggesting investigators should determine whether they had been retained for testing or damaged during the original autopsy. He also considered that finding alongside the reddish discoloration on the back of Nolan's head. Based on his experience, he discussed one possible scenario in which an injury to the front of the neck could have caused a backward fall, resulting in the head injury. He stressed this was only a forensic interpretation, not a proven conclusion, but said the overall pattern appeared consistent with the possibility of homicide. However, that was only one expert's opinion. A second, equally qualified forensic pathologist reviewed the same report and reached a very different interpretation, underscoring how much uncertainty still remains in the available evidence.
I've done hundreds of autopsies on infants, toddlers, young teens, young adults, senior citizens, obese, morbidly obese, different ethnicities, suicides, murders, accidents, natural causes. I've done them all. So when you tell me there was an absence of the interior structure of the neck, my question is why and where is it? Was it recovered with the remains, or were the remains like this when you retrieve the remains? What part of his neck is missing? Has the soft tissue been preserved, or did the water damage or anything else disrupt what could possibly be used as information to find out the cause of death? Because if his neck is missing, then what caused this injury? The structural integrity of a neck, unless it was decapitated or dealt severe trauma, should be intact. So where's the portion of his neck? The interior, the inside of his neck is missing. Why? What can cause that type of damage to the neck and then the trauma to the back of the head? Did they strike him in the back of the head and stab him? Or did they shoot him in the neck? Right? And he falls back and he hits his head. In which case, in my humblest opinion, he was murdered.
I want to pause here.
This is where it's important to separate expert interpretation from established evidence. A board-certified forensic pathologist saying the findings appear consistent with homicide is a significant professional opinion, but it does not create new evidence. It is not an official finding or part of the investigative record. Instead, it reflects one expert's interpretation of a preliminary report. That distinction is why the opinion of a second forensic expert became so important. Dr. Judy Malenik, a board-certified forensic pathologist with extensive courtroom experience, reviewed the same report but took a much more cautious approach. She explained that drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning every other reasonable cause of death must first be ruled out before concluding someone drowned. She illustrated this with simple examples. If someone is shot or strangled before entering the water, the cause of death remains the injury, not drowning. Recovering a body from water alone does not determine how a person died. Dr. Malenik also emphasized that several days of decomposition and 2 separate autopsies make it much harder to determine a definitive cause of death. Because of those limitations, she said some questions may never be answered with complete certainty. That cautious approach contrasted with the earlier expert's opinion and highlighted how experienced forensic specialists can reasonably interpret the same evidence differently. She also pointed to the timeline. Nolan Wells' body was recovered about 2 days after he disappeared, while the independent autopsy took place several days after the original examination. Even with proper refrigeration, decomposition would have continued, making certain injuries more difficult to evaluate. Another major piece of evidence still missing is the toxicology report. Dr. Malenik explained that toxicology relies on samples collected during the first autopsy because bacteria can naturally produce alcohol after death. As a result, later alcohol readings must be interpreted carefully and within the full forensic context. She then addressed one of the report's most discussed findings, the missing anterior neck structures. She agreed those tissues are especially important when evaluating possible strangulation, but explained that retaining tissue after an autopsy is a standard forensic practice while an investigation remains active. Without the original autopsy report, she said it's impossible to know whether the tissue was preserved as a routine precaution or because investigators identified findings requiring further examination. She noted that the retained specimens could eventually reveal injuries or no significant abnormalities at all. Until the state's official autopsy findings are released, there is simply no way to know. Dr. Malenik also explained that families often request independent autopsies in high-profile cases when they are seeking additional answers or greater transparency. Dr. Malenik explained that families often request independent autopsies when they still have unanswered questions during an active investigation. However, she stressed that the state's medical examiner performs the official legal examination, which is intended to remain independent of the family, law enforcement, and prosecutors. She also explained that investigators sometimes withhold forensic details to protect an active case and any future prosecution. For those reasons, she urged patience, noting that the official autopsy and toxicology results have not yet been released, making it too early to reach firm conclusions. Dr. Malenik also addressed how alcohol findings should be interpreted. She explained that if someone becomes intoxicated, loses the ability to swim, and drowns, the cause of death would still be drowning, with intoxication listed only as a contributing factor. However, decomposition creates another challenge, because bacteria can naturally produce alcohol after death. As a result, toxicology findings must be interpreted carefully and never viewed in isolation. She noted that Nolan Wells' body was recovered about 2 days after he disappeared, while the independent autopsy occurred several days later. Even with proper refrigeration, decomposition would have continued, making both injuries and toxicology results more difficult to interpret. Dr. Malenik then addressed one of the investigation's biggest questions, the missing anterior neck structures. While another expert viewed their absence as highly concerning, she explained that retaining tissue after an autopsy is a standard forensic practice for additional testing and should not automatically be viewed as suspicious. At the same time, she agreed those tissues remain critically important. If investigators are evaluating possible manual strangulation, the front of the neck is the primary area where evidence of compression or injury would typically be found. Without access to those retained structures, there are clear lies of death in effort. Dr. Malenik emphasized that the location of an injury matters. The reddish discoloration on the back of Nolan's head or neck does not, by itself, indicate strangulation. She explained that injuries from manual compression are typically found on the front of the neck, making the retained neck structures one of the most important pieces of evidence in the case. Whether those preserved tissues reveal significant injuries or none at all remains unknown. Until the original autopsy findings are released, there is no way to determine why those structures were retained. They may have been preserved as a routine precaution, or because investigators identified findings requiring further examination. At this stage, either explanation remains possible. Dr. Malenik also explained that independent autopsies are common in high-profile cases when families seek additional answers or greater transparency. At the same time, she noted that investigators often limit public information during active cases to protect the investigation, future prosecutions, and witness interviews. She further emphasized that the state's autopsy remains the official medical legal examination because it is conducted under legal authority rather than at the request of any interested party. Another board-certified forensic pathologist, Dr. Priya Banerjee, explained that second autopsies naturally have limitations. By the time an independent examination takes place, organs may already have been examined, tissues preserved, and decomposition may have progressed. These are normal limitations of any second autopsy, not evidence of errors by the original examiner. Taken together, the experts presented a more balanced picture than public speculation often suggests. One forensic pathologist believed the preliminary findings could be consistent with homicide, while Dr. Malenik urged greater caution, explaining that decomposition, delayed recovery, and incomplete forensic evidence limit what can be concluded at this stage. Both opinions come from experienced professionals reviewing the same preliminary report, yet neither represents the final answer. Instead, their differing conclusions highlight that the investigation remains incomplete, the official cause and manner of death have not been determined, and several critical forensic questions are still unresolved. One major development this week changed how the independent autopsy should be viewed. Attorney Benjamin Crump confirmed that the family's independent forensic review is not yet complete. Dr. Roger Mitchell is still waiting for additional evidence from the original examination, including photographs and the retained throat structures, before reaching final conclusions. That detail is significant, because many expected the independent autopsy to provide definitive answers. Instead, the preliminary report showed that the forensic review itself remains unfinished, and many key questions are still unresolved. Crump explained that the next stage depends on evidence the independent team has not yet examined, including the state's original autopsy photographs, retained neck structures, and other materials. Those tissues are especially important because both outside forensic experts identified them as critical to determining whether neck injuries can be confirmed or ruled out. Rather than resolving the investigation, the preliminary report highlighted how much of the forensic picture remains incomplete. The independent review cannot be finalized until those materials and the pending toxicology results become available. Looking at the broader investigation, Sheriff Ledbetter has offered little additional information since the new medical findings became public, continuing only to say that the investigation remains active. Meanwhile, two board-certified forensic pathologists reviewed the same preliminary report, but reached different professional opinions. One believed the findings could be consistent with homicide, while the other urged caution because decomposition, delayed recovery, and incomplete evidence limit what can responsibly be concluded. Neither opinion represents the final determination. Crump also emphasized that the family's independent review remains unfinished, because key records and physical evidence have not yet been released. As a result, the preliminary report does not establish a definitive cause or manner of death, nor does it resolve the competing possibilities investigators are still examining. For now, the investigation's biggest unanswered questions center on the original autopsy photographs, the retained anterior neck structures, and the official toxicology results. Until those findings are released and fully examined, both the state's investigation and the family's independent review remain incomplete, leaving the circumstances surrounding Nolan Wells' death unresolved.